poor leadership, because they bent over backwards. The city bent over backwards to accommodate these companies and gave them payroll tax, deductions or whatever, and really wanted to clean up that mid-market area. And the building that Twitter is in now, the San Francisco Furniture Building or whatever it's called, it had been, empty for years and years. And so, but they can hose down the sidewalk in front of Twitter, but people that don't have anywhere to go, they just march up Market Street,
My understanding is when they would do like the sales, what is it, Dreamforce, the big conference there, that literally they would pay to actually take people off the street, drive a truck around and actually remove people from the street.
I mean that playbook goes back to the 1984 Olympics in LA. I just give them a bus ticket, send them up to Portland. Yeah, just shuffle the deck. Maybe no one will notice.
What's your relationship with the city like now?
I love San Francisco. I mean, it's where I invented myself. It's really where my life started. I moved here when I was probably 18, I guess, and ostensibly to go to college. And it's been my education and, the arts and politics and the sexes and, film and theater and music. Yeah, it's huge. It's still there, it's always been a little bit of a frustrating place, but all those things are still there if you look for them.
You said ostensibly go to college. What does that mean?
It means I come from a middle class family and people go to college. I really didn't have a plan. Took some humanities courses, communications.
Yeah, no, I was listen, I was a creative writing major. I get it, man.
And, it's a way of kind of putting off the inevitable for middle class kids. And back then it was really actually pretty easy to get into school. I don't remember, I do remember one night I dropped acid with some kids and we were up on this viewpoint, and somebody said, "Oh man, I got a split," and I was like, "Why you got to split?" "Well, I got to get up early. I got to take my SATs." And I was like, "What the hell is that? SA what?" So I didn't even know what an SAT was, but somehow I managed to get into college.
Yeah, that's SAT is like an entrance exam for college in a way.
Certainly, it's become a thing. And getting into college has become very, competitive. I don't think I need to tell you that.
No, I mean, it's been a while, not as long, but it's been a while for me as well. But I went to school and became a creative writing major with the idea of pursuing that. It didn't really quite work out that way, but going to college and taking communications, was there some idea somewhere in the back of your brain that this is what you're going to do at some point to financially support yourself?
Oh, that, yeah. Gee, I don't know. I was pretty lost. I didn't really have a career. I mean, I had a vague fantasy about being a musician, but I didn't really know anybody that was. They had an excellent program at San Francisco State. They had a radio station, so I got involved there, and then I had access to the library. They had a lot of records, and I would take them home. That was a big deal for me. I could go on a deep dive with British folk or something, and that was just not accessible to me. So that was huge. And they also had a recording program there. John Barsotti is a bit of a legend, and they had a 4-track studio, and they would have bands come in, and we would record the bands, and we would learn basically the fundamentals of multi-track recording, microphone placement, signal chains, compression, EQ, all those things. So that was a very helpful, useful stuff for me ultimately. But I didn't have any idea about a career or anything like that. You know.
You were actively playing music at that point, and you had some vague idea that maybe this is something you might want to pursue professionally, but you just hadn't quite connected those dots.
Well, I was playing in bands in high school, and playing at the Mabuhay Gardens and on Broadway and all the Berkeley, all the clubs around here, opening and somehow learning the ropes, I guess. But I didn't really. A lot of the bands in San Francisco were from the Art Institute, and they really weren't like out to get signed or whatever. That really was more of a '90s phenomenon, I think. But I mean, I was by the time I was 20, I was in Green on Red, and we were touring the world and playing up and down the Angry Island, the UK and European tours, and we had burned through several record deals, um, with all the expectations and the things that come along with that. So yeah, I mean, I fell into it. But there wasn't an owner's manual like, oh, I'm gonna go to Berkeley School of Music and I'm gonna end up in Alison Krauss's band, playing second fiddle or I don't
So to speak. Yeah.
I don't know.
But that's a short timeline from going to a point where, like, as you said, you didn't really know any other musicians to being in a band that's touring the world. That sounds like it came together pretty quickly.
Didn't seem like it.
Nothing does as you're going through it, but in hindsight,
Yeah, it's kind of a songwriting and being in a band. It's a sort of a self-taught. I wouldn't. I don't know if I'd call it a vocation, but yeah. So everything was a teachable moment, I suppose, in so many ways.
I don't know if San Francisco is ever particularly affordable place to live, but at that point, I assume it must have been significantly easier than it is now to like be able to explore those things and to be able to survive in a city like that and not have a job at Twitter.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, I lived in a warehouse over on Folsom Street, and there were a lot of ways to get by back then. Uh, but in terms of the music, what people now think of as the music business. I mean, I remember I was standing under the awning at the Mabuhay Gardens on Broadway with Dirk Dirksen, who was a punk rock impresario, I guess, and we were looking across the street at this place, The Stone, which was a slicker, more, I don't know, corporate's the word, but venue, and there was a guy putting up the letters, those with like a suction cup and that,
Yeah, on the marquee.
yeah, putting up the letters on the marquee, and he was spelling out Dead Kennedys, and I think that Dirk saw that as some kind of betrayal. And he said to me, he said, yeah, he just started talking to me. He said, yeah, I talked to Jello about this. And what can I say? They want the money. They want to quit they really want to quit their day jobs. And he said, son, when everybody quits their day jobs, then the scene's going to be over. That was his thing.
It's a funny thing, like, after a few decades
which is easy for him to say.
When you reflect on this, and at the time it's like, that something as seemingly simple as just like wanting to play a bigger venue or be out more front of more people was generally frowned upon. Obviously, like, the culture ideas around that have changed. It seems like less of a faux pas to want to survive making music now. I'm partially because it's like so impossible, I would think.
I don't know. I mean, it's just music is there's a lot more well-adjusted people in music these days than there were.
Is that true?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was a little more dangerous.
What do you attribute that to?
I mean, a lot of well-adjusted people get into music now, and they have goals, and you know, I don't know what I attribute it to. I think that um, we live in a time where it's all about maybe being famous. I don't know.
But I think too, I think a lot of it, like the pendulum has swung back and forth a few times since then. But, and granted, this is a bit before my time, but a lot of the kind of, a lot of things that people say with regards to like punk in the early days was this idea of like accessibility in a way that maybe hadn't really been open to people before, like that, that you could go out and make music. And, certainly living through the 90s and a period when there was all that activity with record labels and people being signed, that it did seem accessible. It did seem like a way that people could make a living, and maybe that ultimately like attracted more, I guess, rational people, like less, as you said, like less dangerous people.
Well, let's go back. For me, punk rock. Uh, some might say erase the line between the stage and the audience. So before punk rock, rock music was pretty bloated. You had guys like, progressive rock guys wearing capes and very, very living up in castles and not at a street level in any stretch of the imagination. And so punk rock kind of like leveled the playing field and made it possible for anybody to start a band, pick up a guitar, whatever, you know. And that initial wave of punk rock probably didn't break for 20 years or something.
In terms of like mainstream acceptance, or
Yeah.
Reading or listening to some interviews that you've done, it sounds like the Dead Kennedys were a big part of that for you specifically.
Well, they represented that. I wasn't influenced by them musically that much. I mean, although I really did like East Bay Ray's, guitar playing. He had kind of a surfy style, and he used an Echoplex, and. But yeah, I mean, they were just on the front lines and showing how it was done in many ways.
That actually is an interesting point, because again, as I was reading you discussing your interest in cumbia music, and you're describing kind of the different ingredients, and one of them you said was this kind of Dick Dale surf guitar, and that's a fascinating thing about getting into new genres of music, is finding those through lines, and maybe that recognition that things like aren't as regimented and artificially separated as we tend to believe they are.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Let me address it from this way, like in terms of like accessibility and your willingness to really kind of throw yourself into a different form of music. I mean, cumbia specifically, you're talking about something that like traditionally is like Central South American and is in Spanish, and maybe and is a departure from what you've done previously, but it sounds like there wasn't much in the way of hesitation as far as you going from suddenly being interested in this music to actually going out and playing it.
Well, it's really a gestation story in many ways, because although I was interested in the music, that came as a result of a couple things. One of them was probably lockdown, the fact that I had a lot of time to just kind of lay on the carpet and listen to music. So I became interested in it, and chicha music out of Peru and Colombia. And then, it was really 4 years between records for me, which was an eternity. If I look back at what I've done, you know, the sort of pace I've set somehow or another.
Was that the longest gap for you?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I think back in the Green on Red days, I think we were making a record every year, and then I started making soul records every 18 months, every couple years. But 4 years seemed like a long time. But part of making a record is the fact that I need to get lucky. I need to somehow tap into something that I think that feels fresh and gets me excited, because making a record and writing all the songs and wrestling the whole thing to the ground, um, it's a commitment. So I have to be excited about it, and I think that helped me. And playing with the guys in Key and Save, going down to Salinas and jamming with them was inspiring and energizing, I guess, in some kind of ways. So if I can wake up and I'm thinking about it, and then the more I learned about it, the more it informed what I was doing musically.
Is there a sense in which you feel like you can't force it, that you have to just wait for that inspiration to come?
Well, I don't know about forcing it, but you got to make time to sit quietly in a room and hope your muse shows up. But I mean, you gotta show up. You gotta care. It's not gonna come down and grab you know, it's not gonna stick the pick in your hand. Your inspiration's not gonna come down, and you gotta show up. So I have mixed feelings about that.
In your now quite long career, there must have been albums or projects that did feel like pulling teeth, that were difficult to get across the finish line.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, some songs are just more stubborn than others, and they don't want to behave. Some songs can be great songs themselves, but maybe not a great record. So, um, yeah, there's a lot that's distilled down into making, a, for me anyway, a Chuck Prophet record.
I talked to a lot of people who play blues and jazz, and this idea of like authenticity always comes up. What it means to be authentic, and how you get to a point where you feel like you can play that kind of music in a way that really really honors it. With something like this, again, that was so initially so foreign to you, were there any doubts as far as your ability to actually like play with the band and go out there and play this form of music?
Well, we were talking about punk rock a moment ago, and when if somebody thinks of punk rock, they may think of the Clash.
Sure.
Bunch of guys that could play a little bit, but had something to say. And once they got past the whole excitement of picking up the guitars and doing it, it was really the Clash that opened the doors in terms of what you could do and the possibilities. If I think about an album like London Calling, there's like rockabilly on there. There's
Surf and
surf. I mean, glam rock, ska,
reggae. Yeah.
They were not afraid to anything out of the air and throw it in the Clash Cuisinart. So I don't know if they were playing rockabilly correctly, or if they were playing, when they recorded Police and Thieves, that they were playing reggae in a correct way. I can't say, but I knew how it hit me. So in terms of authenticity, I you know, if we're playing and people are dancing, then I'm not really too concerned about authenticity.
As you said, the kind of the juxtaposition between whatever genre they were playing with and having something to say, you know, in their case, like politically, a lot of times. I'm not super familiar with the lyrical content of genres like cumbia. I mean, you know, I've heard a lot of Latin American music growing up in California, but is there, like, lyrically, is there something that you feel like you're tapping into there as well? Or is it really just kind of that the dance music side?
Yeah, a lot of it's instrumental. A lot of the chicha music uh, that I tapped into was instrumental, and you know, sometimes it would just be one chord. I am such a slave to uh, my school of songwriting in the sense that I'm a such a classicist, you know, that I believe in a verse, you know, you get some content going, and then a chorus is like giving somebody a cookie, as David Hickey describes it, and then you give them another verse, and then you give them another cookie, and then you take the cookie away, and you give them a bridge, and then maybe the bridge gives them another perspective. You know, every night I hope and pray, and then you come back to the chorus, and they haven't. You know, they're so lucky to have that, so happy to have the cookie back. So I'm definitely a slave to what some people might call a brill building classicism. That 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 I that I ended up just sort of mapping my songs over those grooves.
The form is definitely is part of it, but also, again, you know, getting back to a conversation that you were having around this, and you were discussing a lot of the music that you were listening to during the pandemic, you know, prior to your interest in these other forms, and you know, you're discussing like Neil Young or Johnny Mitchell, or you know, musicians who are very like introspective songwriters, and in a lot of cases, the music reflects the lyrical content in that way. I mean, is there a sense in which, at least sort of like traditionally or historically, you feel like the lyrical content you're writing and the musical form that you're playing might be at odds with one another?
No, not really. No, I mean the song has to work. If they're at odds with each other, you know, maybe the song's not working so well. You know, I don't. I mean, you know, I co-wrote a lot of the songs. I came at this record, you know, from in a number of different ways, but um, I never felt that anything was at odds with any, you know.
Maybe at odds is the wrong way of putting it, because you know, I'm not necessarily implying that that they were working against one another, but more that I should be able to think of an example off the top of my head, but a lot of really great music is music that sort of turns some of those orthodoxies on their head, you know, that uses what would be a traditional happy or dance style of music to reflect maybe something that's not so happy in the lyrical content of a song.
Sure, I mean, there's always juxtapositions and editorializing going on to, you know, make it cool. And in music, it's about the surprise, you know. So yeah, it's interesting. It's like it would almost be easier for me, you know, it's almost easier for me just to instead of talking, you know,
Yeah, so there's a little bit of reggae, maybe a little bit of kind of Middle Eastern flair.
that's the way people hear it. Yeah, I mean, I'm a self-taught musician, and so much of what I know, I learned from records, and that's always been the case.
I ask partially because at least like where you were in your life when a lot of this was coming together. You mentioned the pandemic. Obviously, the pandemic was horrible for a lot of reasons, especially horrible for a lot of musicians and, their livelihood. But then I get the sense that you were finally really ready to kind of get yourself out there. And then you were hit with this whole other medical issue at the time.
Well, yeah, of course, there was a pandemic, there was a lockdown, and that happened on the eve of a world tour for me. I had put out a record called The Land That Time Forgot. So, we ended up rescheduling those tour dates 3 times, 4 times. And eventually, we were going to go to Europe and the States, and we had a lot of ground to cover and a lot of dates to make up. And that's when I got my diagnosis that they found a mass in my lower intestine, and then I had stage 4 lymphoma. I was supposed to get on a plane the next day. So that kind of sidelined me, and as I went through 6 months of treatment, and that also, and during those 6 months, I did some listening and playing and kind of immersed myself in the music.
In a very roundabout way, I think what I'm getting at is that it is, this idea of using whatever you make or whatever art you make as a way of sort of like processing or working through things. Do you, as a songwriter and as somebody who plays music, is it a way of processing sort of difficult thoughts and ideas? Is it more of an escape? Is it a combination of the two?
Well, I suppose when I'm playing, live, and it's clicking, and I've got a great band behind me, and I do have a great band behind me, um, then for that hour or two, I'm able to forget what it was I was so worried about. So a lot of a lot of my anxieties and things, they just kind of, my depression or what, it just lifts.
I mean, how, if at all, though, did those personal struggles inform the music on this latest record beyond, again, this sort of discovery of sort of a new form of music for you?
Well, it forced me off the treadmill, is what it did. I've been making records and playing gigs steady for, I don't know, 40 years or something. I have no idea. And it forced me off the treadmill, and I had to sit still, which was cool. Which was pretty cool.
When you're on that treadmill, I mean, is there, because you're always anticipating the next album or the next tour, do you risk getting to a point where you kind of maybe take it for granted and maybe lose some of the connection or the passion that initially really got you into that world?
Well, I mean, not every gig is going to be the most memorable gig, so you press on, you know. Uh, I think there's been times when I'm really engaged in what I'm doing, and what I'm doing is, connecting with people in a bigger way. And then there are times when it probably hasn't. I don't really know how to engineer that, you know. I feel like this record has tapped into something, and people have reacted to it. I mean, I can only, I can only make the music that I think I would like. Now, that turns out not be the best approach. You know?
Financially speaking?
Yeah. It turns out that, you know, but it's still the way I operate. I have to be excited about what I'm doing. So that's a start. But I guess there were times when I wasn't as committed, and maybe it showed.
What does it mean to get off the treadmill, and why is that valuable?
Well, because you can open the window and air things out a little bit. Um, so much of my life has been writing for a record or wrestling that record to the ground, and then I'm out there, doing the hand-to-hand combat and playing gigs, and so much of those cycles um, have been such a big part of my life that when I stopped, it was interesting. People can't. It's hard for people to stop. Maybe they don't have the financial security to stop. And oftentimes, if you're running an organization, even Bob Dylan's probably got 100 people working for him, and if he only plays 25 gigs a year, maybe he's going to lose his guitar tech to Don Henley or somebody. I don't know how that works, but people have their, you're part of a machine that's bigger than you, and so there's a lot of reasons to every once in a while put your head down and grind it out. I have a band that I care about deeply, and I want to keep those guys busy.
On this record specifically, you're playing with this new group of guys. What does that mean for your existing band?
Well, it ended up being a blended family. So Stephanie Finch, my wife of many years, who's been in my band and really been one of the founders, sings on the record.
You couldn't just dump your wife for the album?
No. I think four or five members of Key and Save are on the album, but so are a couple other members of my band, the Mission Express, namely Vicente Rodriguez and James DePreto, and they really glued a lot of it together. So it was a bit of a blended family. And while we're out on tour, I have a couple members of Key and Save, a couple members of the Mission Express, me, and different people.
Did anyone, you don't have to name names, but did anyone in the group have difficulty adjusting to this new direction?
Surprisingly, no, not really. I'm a sensitive person, and I think when I was showing them the songs, I was trying to read the room, and I couldn't tell how much enthusiasm there was. But I'd say, in particular, James DePreto, who I played guitar with, he and I got together and jammed, and I would throw open throw a drum machine through a guitar amp, and he and I would jam, and that's where some of the licks came from, by just pulling them out of the air. We listen to some accordion music and kind of adapt that to guitar, and so he was game, and yeah, and then once we were able to play it in front of people, and you could really feel the room transformed, there wasn't a lot to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, you discussed a little bit about still continuing to deal with some darker themes, and obviously, like, there were some pretty dark, I assume, some pretty dark moments in your life leading up to the making of this record. Thankfully, it sounds like you're mostly or entirely out of the woods at this point. How much does facing something like that influence the content on the record?
I don't know. You'd have to look for it and show me. I can't really say, but how can it not?
Of course,
bleed. How can it not bleed its way into things? I mean, there's a song called "First Came the Thunder" that I wrote with Kurt Lipschutz, as I did many songs, and people thought that that was about the rising tide of conservatism and Trumpism and the MAGA.
Uh,
And I kind of stood back and squinted and was like, yeah, I can see how you might think that, but I don't remember it being that, you know. Um, hard to say. I thought it was more of a relationship song. Um, but people are gonna pull what they want out of it.
I mean, I assume in a case like that, the truth is probably somewhere where in between, right? Where much like dealing with personal struggles, like you you can't entirely divorce something like that from, I don't know, some of these like macro trends and some of these broader things that are happening in the world. Of course, that's going to have, even if it's subconscious, some kind of influence on your words.
Well, music is also about getting out of your head. I mean, like I said earlier, you know, when the gigs are going great, I can't remember what I was worried about.
Do you feel like just that being in your head too much is something that you have struggled with, just generally speaking?
Probably just as much as the next person.
I find that some people more than others. I think some people are like perfectly content to just, and God bless them, like to just sort of operate on the surface level. You know, there is a point, like I'm somebody who at a lot of points in my life has dealt with all sorts of like anxieties and things. And there is a point you get to where you can live in your head too much, but it sounds like music has long been this kind of this outlet for you, or this ability to get it out of some of that sort of depressive cyclical thinking.
Yeah, you get into your body. There's a reason why Neil Young stomps around the stage. You know, he I don't know. He's stomping out the evil spirits.
It's ritualistic in a way, right? I mean, it is this like sort of primitive, whether or not you're thinking about it, like there's just something there's some element of music generally that just gets back to these like early ancestral days of human existence.
The primordial ooze of it all. Yeah.
In terms of this new direction and this new album, obviously, you know, you're going to be touring around it as well. Does this end up being a one-off, or is there a way in which this is kind of obviously a little bit down the road, but it is opening up more avenues for you going forward?
Well, I don't know. That's not really up for me to decide. You know, I mean, maybe this summer offers will come in for festivals, and maybe I'll write some more songs. But for now, I'm kind of enjoying taking this ride out for a joyride. I've been enjoying playing. We just got back from a month of dates in Europe, Spain, Denmark, northern, you know, Europe, down south. Uh, just an incredible action-packed tour, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm looking forward to getting out and playing in the States.
Even in sort of like, even after the worst show or the worst day, like you really do have to recognize that, like at the end of the day, the fact that you're able to do this, you know, that and the worlds that like playing music professionally has opened up, that you're obviously, you know, a lot of it's skill, but that you ultimately are like an incredibly lucky person to be able to still do this at this point.
Yeah, I guess luck's a funny word for it, but I think I guess the real gift is that I still dig it. I'm still excited about it, and I think that's probably the gift. Sometimes the economics make very, very little sense. Sometimes they make more sense, you know. They're often, when it comes to that stuff, there's a lot of intangibles involved. But yeah, I still enjoy doing it. I still enjoy the traveling. Generally speaking, people are happy to see me when I get there, wherever it is I'm going. And I've got a great band, you know, Vicente Rodriguez, Stephanie Finch, James DePreto, Joaquin, Zamito Garcia, Alejandro El Flaco Gomez, Mario and Mario Cortez, and I hope I'm not leaving anybody out. And so I've got a great band. Oh, Vicente Rodriguez, I believe. Yeah. Anyway, I've got a great band, and we all enjoy each other's company, and we enjoy the time on the bandstand. And you know, no matter what's going on in our lives or whatever's going on, we're able to suspend whatever that is and get up there and do it. You know, and consistently. And yeah, that's a real gift. I mean, um, I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that I have a job. I'm grateful that, you know, after the election, we were playing in Germany. I remember I was looking out into the audience, and I wasn't thinking like, oh, that's a Trumper, that's a Democrat, that's a. I wasn't really thinking about any of those things. I was just thinking, oh, we're in Germany, and these people have their own problems, man. But tonight, but tonight we're all here.
Gonna wake the dead, get them on their feet. Gonna count our nickels like we're counting sheep. Gonna rob from Peter to pay Paul, and that's not all. Gonna teach the children a little history, but not too much now. Gonna cop a plea.